got the microphone level all the way up so they can hear me? Yeah, unmute me, please. Yep, just that first one. All right. Don't put the speakers on, though, because I'll come screaming out. All right, so I mentioned this morning that we're going to be speaking on offerings tonight. Of course, in our stewardship series, we've looked at a proper view of things, stewarding our time, stewarding our gifts, why we give. Then this morning we looked at tithing. I forgot to mention this morning, and so I'm going to mention it tonight, and the rest of them can hear it on live stream. But Leica shared a picture of a church in the Philippines. I think it was the Philippines. It was somewhere. And it reminded my wife and I of a church in Korea. But the picture was this. There was a bulletin board in the church, and it had the verse on there, Malachi 3, verses 8 through 10, like we looked at this morning. Will a man rob God? Was in there above that. And then underneath that was a bulletin board with all the names of people, and it said non-tithers board. So in the church, the pastor would look and see who was tithing, and he put up the names of those that weren't tithing and said non-tithers church board. And of course there was a list of, there's all these pages with people's names on it. But the church in South Korea that picture reminded me of, the pastor would look at the offering plate after the offering was taken up, and he would say, there's not enough in there, go get it again. And the ushers would have to go and take up more until the pastor was satisfied with the amount that was in the offering plate. Now, are either one of those good examples of why we should give? No, you shouldn't have to do that. We looked at it this morning, not grudgingly. If I tell John, hey, John, there's not enough money in the plate, pass it around again. How are you going to give? Yeah, that's going to be grudgingly. Well, he's asking for another $5. Well, he's asking for another $10. He's asking for another. And so that's how we cause people to give grudgingly, and that's how giving, whenever it's spoken of in a church, it is in a poor light. People are against pastors preaching or teaching on giving because there's people like that, and there's more like that than there are that are right. And so, we need to be careful. But I'm thinking about putting a non-tithers board up. I got inspiration. I'm thinking of, because I need a new truck. What's the other motivation for doing something like that? I need a new truck, and so I got to be able to pay for it, and so I'm going to put non-tithe. Is that how things ought to work? That is absolutely incorrect. We looked at this morning in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and we're going to go there again. So if you would, open your Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter number 9. Oh, we're talking about this verse. This is that verse, not giving grudgingly. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. But we're going to focus on another part. So again, offerings. Offerings are above and beyond the tithe. Remember, in Malachi chapter 3, we looked at this morning, will a man rob God? Wherein have we robbed thee? And you remember God's answer? It was in tithes and offerings. And so we're going to be looking at tonight offerings. All right, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and we'll look at verses 6 and 7. Like I said, I think we looked at these verses this morning. It says this in verse number 6, but this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly. He which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly, nor or of necessity, for God loveth the cheerful giver. I know we looked at those verses because we talked about hilaros being the Greek word there, where we get our English word hilarious. And so but the phrase that we're going to look at, we're going to key in on, is in verse number 7. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart. And I touched on this a little bit this morning. How much did God love us? How much did he give for us? Did he not give his only begotten Son so that you and I would have the opportunity to go to heaven, either at the rapture or when we pass on? And so we ought to reciprocate. We ought to love the Lord just as much. And we were kind of touching on it again this morning. And one of the ways that that's reflected, one of the ways that we show that we love him is in our actions. And we quoted John chapter 3 and verse number 16, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave. All right, again, if we love God because he first loved us, we saw that verse here recently. But if we love him, what is a natural inclination? What's a natural thing for us to do after that? Is to give, is it not? Hey guys, do you love your wives? Do you ever give her anything? We're coming up on our anniversary. I plan on having a gift for my wife. Why? Because I love her, right? It could be something simple like just a chocolate bar and her favorite kind. Dark chocolate, chili. That's her favorite kind. It could be chocolate-covered strawberries. It could be a ring that she's been looking for. It could be whatever. But one of the ways that I can show my love towards her is to give her a gift. The way that she shows love to me is also in gifts. Did I share with you guys what I got for Christmas? I got a knife. I got a carving knife. It's a Viking carving knife. Yeah, it's awesome. It came in a case like this, and I pulled it out, and that blade is about that thick, and it's got a handle on it. And so when I'm smoking meat or something like that, I've got something to cut that meat with. Did you hear how my voice just went? Yeah, I'm going to cut red meat. All right? Now, she knew that I would like that, and so she got that for me. So the natural inclination, or the natural way that we show our love one to another, is by giving. We give our time. We give our effort, our energy, and certainly we give gifts. And so that the same thing, the Lord so loved us, he gave us his Son. We ought to purpose in our hearts that we're going to show our love for him by following this command. And excuse me, and again, the offerings fall under that same. It's a command with a promise. And what a promise. Let's look at another promise, another command and another promise about giving. Look with me in Luke chapter 6. You're in 2 Corinthians. Go back to Luke chapter number 6. Luke chapter 6. Again, here's a command followed with a promise. All right, Luke chapter 6, we'll look at verse number 38. Luke 6:38. Here's the command, give. All right, who's the implied subject there? You. It's not stated, but who's Luke speaking to? Or who's the Lord speaking to and Luke is writing it down? Yes, believers, Christians. You give. Doesn't that sound like a command? Matter of fact, that word give is in the imperative, which is command. You old military guys, you remember getting commands? Right? Your drill instructor, especially when you were in boot camp, your drill instructor, the flat-brimmed hat come up to you and start yelling at you. And half the time I couldn't even understand what he was saying. But I caught on to the command, saying, snap to. And no English words proceeded out of their mouths. Arch. Right? O-A-R-O-O-E-R. I have not even said one English word in that whole thing, and yet the military guys knew exactly what I said. I said stand at attention, I said forward march, and I gave the cadence for it. There's commands, and that's the imperative. So that's what this is. The Lord puts on his wide-brimmed hat. By the way, did you guys have blue ropes? In the Air Force, when I was in basic training, we had the brims. We had the flat brim, which everybody wears. But then we had a blue rope. He was a senior drill instructor. And the blue rope would come. And boy, if you didn't snap to when he was around, you were cleaning the latrine with your toothbrush. And so we always snap to. Now, could you imagine the Lord Jesus Christ popping on his little brim hat? It's sitting down like this, down over his eyes, so you can't even see him, and he's standing there like a bulldog. He says, "Get!" What are we going to do? Yes, sir. Right? But then here's the promise. It continues on. So the command is you give. But then it continues on. It says, it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over shall men give to your bosom. For with the same measure that you meet, withal it shall be measured to you again. So we just read in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, if you sow sparingly, you'll reap sparingly. If you sow bountifully, you'll reap bountifully. Well, that's what he's talking about here. With the same measure that you meet, whatever you sow, that's how you're going to reap. So if you sow sparingly, you're going to reap sparingly. If you sow bountifully, you're going to reap bountifully. All right, that's what the Lord is saying here in this. But look at those descriptive words. Give, and it should be given unto you. Now, that would be enough if the Lord just stopped there and then went on and said, for with the same measure that you meet. That would have been sufficient. But then he describes how it will be given to us. Pressed down, good measure. I was talking about this morning. Any gardeners here? Maybe not in Tucson. There's like you can't even garden in the ground. But have you ever gardened? You put in, a row of beans. We used to do this in Virginia. I had a good friend. He had a big garden. We'd help him. And he would plant some beans. And so he would plant a bean, a bean, a bean, a bean, a bean. So we'd have one row of beans. All right, good measure. How many beans did I get off of one of those plants? If I plant one bean, right, we're sitting there for a whole afternoon snapping beans, these green beans. We're just snapping off the ends so we get the middle portion of it, right? So if we planted one row, we're sitting there all afternoon snapping all the beans that we got off of it. That's good measure. All right? Press down. So you're walking the line, right? You're walking the line, you're throwing the beans into your bag or a pot if you got a pot. We would do either. It would be a pot, or it'd be in a bag. And we're doing this, and the pot or the bag would fill up, and we would tamp it down with our hands. That's pressed down. Why would we do that? Why would we do that? Well, you do a little wiggle like this. You get a little wiggle here. They kind of line up a little bit, and the beans do this instead of this. So you got a little more space. That's pressed down. Right? And then it says shaken together. You grab that bag or the pot, and you're shaking it. What are you doing that for? So you get the beans to do this more. Right? There's a Greek word for the shaken together. You know what that Greek word is? Huh! Have you ever, big potato sacks? Have you ever seen a big potato sack? And you want to get more room in it? You would grab that thing up, you go, huh! And you, Well, that's what this shaken together is, to get more room. And then it says running over. Running over. Have you ever had a leaky faucet? Like a spigot on the outside of your house? And did you ever stick a pot underneath it? Or a bowl or something like that to catch the drips of water? And then, have you ever noticed that when the water would get to the brim, that it would actually go up above the brim a little bit? Like this. And then one more drop of water would drop in there and break that surface tension, and then the water would just start pouring out. That's what this is talking about here. You get your pot full, you get your bag full, it goes up a little bit more because there's surface tension, and then that one more bean or that one more drop of water, and all of it just starts pouring out. Your bag would break, and it just all pours out. All right, so do you see the picture here? So the picture is the command you give, and the promise is, and it should be given back to you, so much so that you can't receive it. Doesn't that sound familiar? Malachi chapter 3, we looked at that this morning. See if I don't open you the windows of heaven. So much so that you can't receive it. All right, so this is saying almost the same thing. Good measure, shaken together, or pressed down, shaken together, running over. Shall men give to your bosom? And then again, how you sow is how you'll reap. And so this command here, according to as we purpose in our hearts, if we're stingy, God's going to be stingy. If we're, by the way, this is the only part in your whole entire life you ought to ever be liberal. If you're liberal, God's going to be liberal. All right? We're only talking about being liberal in your giving. All right? Don't be liberal in anything else. All right, let's take a look at Matthew chapter 6. So you're in Luke 6. Let's go to Matthew chapter 6. There's some things we ought to not do when we're giving. Matthew chapter 6, and we'll start in verse number 1. We'll read the verses and then I'll give an example. So Matthew chapter 6 and verse number 1. Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. And so once again, one of the ways that we ought to not give is by shouting it out. Here I am giving the announcements in the church, and I'm saying, hey, John, I need you to come up and grab the offering plate. It's time to take the offering. And then Angela shouts out, hey, I want to give $500,000 to our new building. What'd she just do? She just announced to everybody how much money she's going to give. And what does Matthew chapter 6 tell us? Now, doing alms is you giving. If you give anything to the poor, that's giving alms. If you give whatever to the church, that's giving alms. All right? And so the Lord is saying in Matthew chapter 6, take heed that you do not your alms before men. Angela ought to not be shouting out, I'm going to give $500,000 to the building. What's she doing? She's blowing her trumpet. Right? Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee. They would do that in the Old Testament, and the priests mostly would do that. They would have a guy who was blowing a trumpet. I'm bringing my bag of money. I'm going to do my alms. I'm bringing my bag of money. I'm letting everybody know I'm bringing my bag of money. And the guy coming in behind him, I'm bringing my bag of money too, but mine's bigger than his. And it becomes a competition. And competition is prideful, is it not? And does the scripture say anything about pride? It says a thing or two about pride. And so we need to be careful of that. And so it tells us in verse number 3, when thou doest alms, let not your left hand know what your right hand doeth. When the offering plate is passed, all right? And I'm just going to give you some practical tips right now. When the offering plate is passed and you have a tithe envelope, put your tithe envelope face down. All right? Here's the reason why. If I come over here, and John's coming and he's taking the offering, and he walks over to my wife, and my wife lays hers up, and she's given $10,000. Right? Who sits right there? Jay sits right there. Who's Jay to the church? He's the treasurer. And what he looks at that face-up envelope. Well, Miss Terry, she gave $10,000. And he'll go, woo! Right? But this verse is telling us not to do that. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. So when you take your offering envelope and you put it face down, why is that? So that the treasurer doesn't go woo. He might do that back there when he's counting it, but not in the middle of the service. And by the way, why would you put your offering envelope face up if not for it to be seen? Now, I know probably most of us, we do it not even thinking about it. Right? But let's think about it. Let's put our tithe envelopes in face down so that our left hand doesn't know what our right hand is doing. Okay? That's just a little practical tip. We're not to go around like these Old Testament Pharisees and blowing a trumpet and saying, hey, look how much I'm giving. So, Angela, I'm expecting that check for $500,000 for the building. Just don't tell everybody. Okay? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Yeah. And so, once again, one of the ways that we do not give is by telling everybody that this is what I'm going to do. Sometimes we'll get into a competition here. My wife will give $10,000. Jay will see that. He'll say, oh, I'm going to up her. I'm going to give $15,000. Right? Then John's going to get it. He's looking at it because he's taking up the offering. He's looking at, well, she gave $10,000. He gave $15,000. Well, I'm going to give $20. I'm going to give 20. And then Jordan, the sleeper cell over there, you know, he's loaded. Stephanie doesn't know it yet, but he's loaded. I was waiting to hear something from the nursery. And he throws in 50. because he saw 10, 15, and he's not going to be outdone by anybody else. But then y'all are going to be blown away when Angela throws in her half meal. That we become now a church of pride. Yes, of competition. Now, the treasurer will like that, the bank account will like that, but our spirit would be horrid. The spirit of this church would be horrid if that was what we were doing in the church. And so the Lord is warning us against that. Don't tell anybody what you're going to do. Now, if you want to come to me in my office and say, hey, Pastor, we got, a big old bonus or something like that, and we'd like to give it to maybe a missionary, a mission project. We'd like to give it to a church project or somebody else in the church. How can we help? That absolutely is okay, but in my office with the door closed so that you're not saying it in my office to me loud enough so everybody else can hear it. Right? And so we need to be careful about this matter for the spirit of the church. And so, yes, give. Don't blow your trumpet and say, I'm going to give this much. All right, now let's take a look at Philippians chapter number 4. Philippians chapter number 4. Paul is patting some folks on the back about their giving. Paul is doing it in this letter. I thank God for these. And then we get down to verse number 17. And he's careful to say this. Philippians chapter 4 and verse number 17. He says, not because I desire a gift. So Paul's not writing this letter to the church at Philippi so that they'll give more money to him. He's not writing it to the church at Philippi so that the church at Colossae, when they get a hold of the letter and they read it, that they give Paul more money so that they're not going to be outdone by the church at Philippi. He says, not that I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. And folks, this is the reason why I do stewardship every single year. This is why I preach on stewardship every single year. It's not so that our offerings get big. It's because I desire fruit that may abound to your account. Because it tells us in Luke chapter 6 and verse 38 where we looked at give, and it shall be given to who? You. The same you that was supposed to give. You give, and it will be given to you. Right? And so I'm not looking, when I preach on this, I'm not looking at trying to get the church bank account really big and all of that. What I'm looking for, not that I desire a gift, but that that fruit may abound to your account. And then he continues on, but I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. Verse 19, my God shall supply all your need. When does he do that? The context here is when we give. When is God going to supply all of our need? The context, again, is when we give. And more specifically, and we're going to look at this later on, more specifically what he's talking about here is a missions offering. Paul being a missionary, he's on one of his missionary journeys. The church at Philippi is giving to him and once and again, and Epaphroditus has brought him this gift from the church at Philippi. And then Paul says it is an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God. And then he says, but my God shall supply all your need according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. How rich is God? Yeah, how rich is God? I mean, come on. Not only does he own the cattle on 1,000 hills, but he owns the hills that the cattle are on. And so how rich is he? Look again at the verse 19. My God shall supply all your need according to whose riches? His riches. And again, how rich is he? The gold is mine, the silver is mine, saith the Lord. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He owns the hills. By the way, he created all of creation. Do you think planet Earth is the only planet that has gold on it? I think it's a common element. You know how common I think it is? He paved streets of it. He builds mansions with it. There's so much gold in creation that it's like concrete and asphalt to him. How rich is he? Yeah. And then it says here, but my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. And so again, the idea here is not, I'm trying to build up the church's bank account. It's, I desire fruit that it may abound to your account. When we talk about missionaries and giving, our church, we give $100 a month to each of our missionaries. All right, that comes out of our faith promise that we take up once a year, and you guys are faithful in giving it. Through the faith promise giving, we're able to support our missionaries. Do we expect missionaries to see people saved? Yeah, but still the expectation there is we'll see people saved. Building churches, that's the expectation. What my wife said is correct. We expect them to give the gospel. We expect them to be out and about doing it. If we get a prayer letter and we haven't seen where somebody's, not getting saved or anything like that, we certainly don't drop them. We keep supporting them, but the expectation is the gospel is going out. The expectation really is that they'll see people saved. That's the expectation here. Same expectation. And when we support one missionary and he sees 10 people saved, we've prayed for him, we've given, we're doing the faith promise, and I'm going to get into this more when I'm speaking on faith promise, but we get into faith promise giving. He sees 10 people saved, that's 10 pieces of fruit that abounds to our account. And then if those people see people saved, that's more fruit to our account. I was preaching this one time and I called them grand fruit. I like that. And then great grand fruit. Right? People that you led to the Lord are leading people to the Lord, and those people are leading people to the Lord, and those people are leading people to the Lord. All that fruit abounds to our account if we're given the offerings. That's what this is talking about. Where he says, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. So why do we give offerings? We mentioned this before. Why do we give offerings? He loved us so much that we want to give. He gave to us. He loved us so much he gave to us. And if we love him, we ought to show it in the same way. We ought to give to him. What are different types of offerings that you can give through the church? I'm just going to give a list that's a practical list. The first one is missions, faith promise. We have a conference on that. We're going to have a conference coming up here shortly. As a matter of fact, Lord willing, in this preacher's fellowship, I'm going to be able to line somebody to come up and preach for me. And we'll get some dates. But we have a conference about faith promise. That's certainly one type of offering. Another one is the building fund. We have that on our tithe envelopes. We have tithe, building fund, or missions, and then building fund. And then it says other, right? And the other would be If you just decide that you want to give a gift to somebody else in the church, that's an offering. If you just want to give a gift to the church, that's an offering. If you want to give a special gift to a missionary, that's an offering above your faith promise. Projects. We just voted this afternoon to send $1,000 to the TACONs. By the way, I was messaging with them this afternoon, and they are very grateful for our church sending that. We're going to be sending that here shortly, and they're grateful for that. And so a project, and then really anything that you give that's not your tithe is an offering. Anything that you give to the church that's not your tithe is an offering. All right, so we're talking specifically about offerings this evening. And so tithe is 10%, offering is anything above that. Right? And we are required to give an offering. And like I said, so this morning I was talking about 11%. The bare minimum that you should be given is 11%. Tithes and an offering. But according as you purpose in your heart is how you ought to give. We were just looking at that in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. So we're talking about offerings here. And of course, tithes this morning and stewardship in general. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the subject matter?